And during this series, we've been going through the book of Acts. We looked at Acts 1:8, how Jesus said, "You will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, in Judea, into Samaria, and to the ends of the earth." We looked at how in the first 7 chapters of Acts, we really saw how the church was being established, how the church was established. But then in Acts chapter 8, we looked at how the church began to expand. And really, it began to expand out of Jerusalem because they were persecuted. The persecutions, the pain of persecutions, caused them to grow. And that's what I talked about last week, growing pains. And the main person behind these persecutions was a man named Saul. Saul was a full-blooded Jew, and he was also a Roman citizen. He was a very well-educated person. In fact, in today's society, to equate his education from then to now would be something like this. He went to a very, very good private high school. He attended Ivy League colleges, and then after that, he went to the best seminaries in the world. That's how educated this guy Saul was. Okay, he was very well educated. On top of that, he was also a devout Pharisee. Now, the Pharisees were a religious party. And in Hebrew, the word Pharisee, it actually means separated one. And that's exactly what they were. They were separated from the rest of society. Why were they separated? Well, because, first of all, they obeyed 613 commandments. I mean, I couldn't remember that many, let alone obey all of them. On top of that, they'd pray long, complicated prayers all day long. And they would never even associate with someone or something that was considered unclean. And so they were quite literally separated from people. But on top of that, the Pharisees did not like Jesus. And they especially didn't like that Jesus rose from the dead, and because of that, a movement had started that we now call Christianity. The early church has started and to grow to spread the good news of Jesus. And in Acts chapter 9, verse 1, we read this. Meanwhile, Saul was uttering threats with every breath and was eager to kill the Lord's followers. So he went to the high priest. Now, I want to stop there for a moment before we read more, because the high priest was typically the leader of this special council called the Sanhedrin Council. And usually when you see like the high priest, it's actually referring to the Sanhedrin Council because the high priest presided over that council. And why is that important? Well, it's important because in religious cases, the Sanhedrin had the authority to excommunicate or execute the guilty party. And on top of that, they also had access to kind of like a police force to help enforce their rulings. And so let's continue. Verse 2 says this. He requested letters addressed to the synagogues in Damascus, asking for their cooperation in the arrest of any followers of the way he found there. He wanted to bring them, both men and women, back to Jerusalem in chains. Now, I want to stop there and address this. First of all, I want you to see something. Christians weren't called Christians at the time. They were called followers of the way. It's going to be very important. Followers of the way. But I also want you to see something, that the persecutions that started in Jerusalem, we read about this last week. They started in Jerusalem, and it caused them to leave. Last week, it specifically said they left to Judea and Samaria, right in Jesus' words. And now we see they're also in another country, Damascus, the country of Syria. And they're in this other country, and we know they're from Jerusalem because Saul says something. He says, I want to go get them, and I want to bring them back to Jerusalem. That means they were once in Jerusalem. They left, and now he wants to bring them back to Jerusalem. And so Saul, with the approval of the Sanhedrin and a small police force, was on his way to Damascus. In fact, that's kind of the title of my message this morning is, I'm on my way. I'm on my way. Tell somebody you're watching with, say, I'm on my way. I'm on my way. Let me tell you about Saul when he was on his way. The journey from Jerusalem to Damascus was about 140 miles. Now, we may think of 140 miles and say, well, that's not too far at all. I mean, that's actually the distance from Buffalo to Syracuse. I could drive there in about 2.5 hours. And the thing is, they weren't driving. In fact, the entire journey was done on foot. And it would take about a week of travel of walking. What makes things even worse is this. Saul's only company was this kind of police force that came with him from the Sanhedrin Council. But since Saul was a Pharisee, he'd have nothing to do with them. And so Saul would actually walk alone on the road for 140 miles for about a week. Then, on the way to Damascus, just before arriving, he would have to climb Mount Hermon. Mount Hermon was the tallest mountain in ancient Israel, and it was on Israel's northeast boundary. Meaning, as he got to this mountain, he'd be leaving Israel, entering Syria. And in the next verse, before we read it, you're going to see that it says he was almost at Damascus. So he was probably on Mount Hermon, this giant 9,000-foot mountain, looking down on the city of Damascus as he encountered Jesus. Let's go to verses 3 through 6, says this. As he was approaching Damascus on this mission, a light from heaven suddenly shone down around him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice saying to him, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And who are you, Lord? Saul asked. And the voice replied, I am Jesus, the one you are persecuting. Now get up and go into the city, and you will be told what you must do. Now stop there. Saul was on the way to Damascus to find followers of the way. They weren't called Christians, they were called followers of the way. Saul was on his way to find followers of the way. What does the way mean? Well, another way you could say it is the road. In fact, what's interesting is followers of the way could also be called followers of the road. And Saul's journey to Damascus is actually called many times the Damascus Road conversion. The entire Bible is actually filled with people meeting God when they were on their way. All the way back to Abraham. You can read about Abraham, and it says, God told Abram, he said, listen, I want you to leave your land. I want you to leave your people. I want you to leave your father's house. And in Genesis 12:7, we read that as Abram was on his way, the Lord appeared to him. Abraham's grandson, Jacob, when he was on his way back home, he met God and wrestled with God. In the New Testament, we read about the road trips, the road trips of Jesus, the road trips of the apostles, the road trips of other disciples. We read about the way of salvation, the way of peace, the way of the Lord, the way of God. We see that the risen Jesus appeared to two of his disciples when they were on their way to another city. Can't forget about the Ethiopian eunuch when he was on his way from Jerusalem to Gaza. He was converted. And here we see Jesus appeared to Saul when he was on the way to Damascus. And a lot of us are on the way somewhere. It might be a long, lonely journey, but don't you dare give up, because that's when Jesus shows up, when you're on your way. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. And your road might seem really, really long. It might seem really, really lonely. And it might not be what you expected. You might be at the bottom of a mountain looking up. You might be at the top of a mountain looking down. But when God shows up in your journey, nothing will ever be the same. I don't know if you've ever heard this phrase before when someone says, like, I've arrived, or have you arrived? A phrase where someone would use that word to say, I've achieved a certain goal. I've attained to a certain level of perfection. For example, someone might say, I've arrived in my finances, right? And depending on the context, if they're talking about finances, I've arrived. That means, hey, I make the money I want, the salary I got, I've saved what I wanted, I have what I want, I've arrived. Someone might say, I've arrived in my education, I got all the degrees I want, I'm as smart as I want to be. Someone might say, I've arrived in my physical look, I'm at the weight I want, I look the way I want, I've arrived. You could say about me as a pastor of Lovejoy. You could say, once Lovejoy arrives, I'm going to be happy as a pastor. What would that look like? Well, to arrive, we'd have to have a perfect church. A church where we're reaching tons of people and discipling people all at the same time perfectly, a church where there's no complaints, a church where the services are the perfect length, where everybody's happy, they're not too long, they're not too short, where Jonathan, he preaches messages where they're engaging, but they're deep at the same time. It's a perfect church. We've arrived, and we all know. That's not going to happen. We're not perfect. There's always more to grow. There's always more to learn. There's always more to do, and the list goes on and on and on. We all want to arrive somewhere, but the truth is, we hardly ever arrive in life, but we're usually on the way. In fact, you need to cut yourself some slack. You might not have arrived yet. You might not be the perfect person you want to be, but that's okay. You're on your way. We need to have a better attitude about not being perfect, about not arriving yet, about our life still being a mess. Why? Because the fact is, so many times my life is a mess. So many times my schedule's too packed, I'm too busy, everything else in life takes too long, I don't even know what I'm doing half the time, and on top of all my normal problems, the whole world is shut down because of this pandemic. But here's why you need to have a better attitude. Because I'm on the way. I'm on my way. Tell the person sitting next to you, are you on the couch? I'm on my way. I might not be there yet, but I'm on my way. Listen, if you aren't perfect, but you aren't giving up either, you need to type in the comments, I'm on my way. Why is that important? Because God meets with us when we are on the way. God doesn't wait to meet with you after you've arrived. God doesn't wait to use you after you're perfect. If you think I'm perfect because I'm a pastor, you're going to be in for an eye-opening. You're going to be shocked because God didn't wait till I was perfect. God's using me as a messed up person. God's going to use you just the way you are. As long as you're on the way, He doesn't wait till you arrive, until you've achieved some status. God uses you wherever you're at as long as you're on the way. But if you never start the journey, if you never try, you may never run into God because you never got on the way. One of my favorite examples of God meeting people on the way is the story of the prodigal son. Jesus told this story, a parable of the prodigal son. A parable is a short story to prove a point. And He told this story of a father who had two sons. And one of the sons comes up to the dad and he says, listen, I don't want to live with you anymore. I don't want to be here anymore. Can you just give me my share of the inheritance now? I want to leave. I want to do my own thing. And of course, it broke the father's heart. Of course, he was sad. But the father listened and gave him the money. The son bounces, he leaves, goes to another country, parties all the time, does whatever he wants, drinking, going out, prostitutes, you name it. And one day the son, he wakes up hungry, broke, and lonely. The fleeting pleasures of temptation, the fleeting pleasures of sin left him worse than ever before. Now, I'm sure I'm not the only one who could relate to this person. There's this fleeting pleasure of sin that we're tempted to, and we fall for it. We think we'll be happier. And all of a sudden, one day, we wake up broke. We wake up hungry for purpose, hungry for fulfillment, and we wake up all alone. And so this son finally gets the courage to go back home, and he's on his way home. He's on the way. What a difficult journey that must have been. What an embarrassing journey that must have been. Think about how embarrassed he must have been to go back and have to face his dad, to face his brother, and to say, hey, remember all that money I demanded you give me? It's all gone. I got nothing to show for it. How embarrassing must that have been? How difficult must it have been to not know how they're going to react? Would his dad reject him? Would his dad cross his arms like, I told you so. You messed up. You can't do it without me. What would happen? And the son is on the way. And what I love about this story is as he's on the way home, it says the father, who represents God in this story, the father sees the son far off. And he runs out to meet his son while he was on the way. And you might be too embarrassed to start your journey. You might seem like it's too difficult, it's too long, it's almost impossible, but I want to encourage you, if you get on your way, God will meet you. You might say, well, I'm not who I want to be today. I'm not the person I want to be today. But guess what? I'm on my way. Some of us, we need to stop blaming God for all of our bad relationships when we never try to work on ourselves, when we never try to get emotionally healthy, when we never try to improve ourselves. Instead, we just go from relationship to relationship. You need to start the journey of becoming the man, the woman God has created you to be. You might say, my marriage may not be what it should be, but I'm not giving up. I'm on my way. It's not too late to save your marriage. It's not too late to change and to improve. You might say, I have a lot of debt. My finances are terrible, but I'm not going to give up. I'm on my way. You don't have to change everything overnight. You're not going to be rich the next day, but you know what you can do? Spend a little less money. Pay off some debt. You could start to become generous and start giving. And all of a sudden, I promise you, at some point in your journey, long as you stay on the way, you will encounter God. Whatever it is for you, your kids, your integrity, your character, your health. Guess what? I might not have arrived, but I'm on my way. I might not be perfect, but I'm on my way. Let's continue the story in Acts verses 7 to 9. It says, the men with Saul stood speechless, for they heard the sound of someone's voice, but saw no one. Saul picked himself up off the ground, but when he opened his eyes, he was blind, so his companions led him by the hand to Damascus. He remained there blind for 3 days and did not eat or drink. Saul had intended to enter Damascus leading an army, instead entered Damascus blind, helpless, and led by the hand. Now, I don't know about your journey. I don't know how long it's going to take. I don't know how many setbacks you'll have. I don't know how difficult it will be, how frustrating it will be, how lonely it'll be. But this one thing I do know. Somewhere along the way, God will do a work in you. God will change you. God will grow you. God will help you. God will meet you, and God will be with you. Saul was an arrogant, prideful, religious zealot. But while he was on the way, God changed him from someone who destroyed the church to someone who is going to build God's church. I'm on my way. I'm on my way. I may not be perfect. I may not have arrived, but you know what? I'm on my way. And that's when I'm going to encounter God. Let's continue the story. Verses 10 through 15 says this. Now there was a believer in Damascus named Ananias. The Lord spoke to him in a vision, calling Ananias. Yes, Lord, he replied. The Lord said, go over to Straight Street to the house of Judas. I love that, how Saul doesn't even know where he is. He's probably in a different home. But God said, I know the street. I know the house you're in. You may feel like you're not in the right place. You're not at the right time. You're all messed up. But God hasn't lost track of where you are. He says, go over to Straight Street to the house of Judas. And when you get there, ask for a man from Tarsus named Saul. He's praying to me right now. I have shown him a vision of a man named Ananias coming in and laying hands on him so he can see again. But Lord, Ananias exclaimed, I've heard many people talk about the terrible things this man has done to the believers in Jerusalem. And he is authorized by the leading priest to arrest everyone who calls upon your name. But the Lord said, go. I love this part. For Saul is my chosen instrument. Saul is my chosen instrument to take my message to the Gentiles and to kings as well as to the people of Israel. God chose Saul. Other versions, instead of saying my chosen instrument, it says my chosen vessel. And that word vessel means something that is useful, something that is helpful. In fact, it's specifically talking about in the Greek that it's a vessel, that it's a wife that is a good instrument, a good vessel that is helpful to a husband. That the wife, she is contributing to the usefulness of the husband. That the husband is enhanced. The husband is a better person because the wife is a good vessel. Just like my wife, I'm a better husband, I'm a better father, I'm a better preacher, I'm a better pastor, I'm a better person, I'm a better Christian because my wife is a good vessel. She's helpful. And that's exactly what Jesus was saying about Saul. Saul is useful to me. He's helpful to me in spreading the gospel. And no matter how bad you've been, no matter how messed up your life may be, No matter how many times you've ignored the call of God on your life, you are still God's chosen instrument. You are useful. You are important. You are valuable to God. You just got to get on your way. You just got to start going. You just got to start out in your journey. Saul was a murderer of Christians. And yet God still found value in him. And God still finds value in you. In fact, when Saul encountered Jesus, it says that he heard a voice. In fact, he heard the voice of Jesus Christ. It reminds me of Romans chapter 10, verse 17, where it says this. It says, so faith comes from hearing. That is, hearing the good news about Christ. And you might be on your way. But if you started to struggle, if you're starting to want to give up, if you just need some faith, faith comes from hearing the word of God. Maybe you've heard too much other things and not enough of the word of God. Maybe you need to let yourself know it's okay to shut the news off. It's great to stay informed, to know what's happening in the world, but it's okay to shut it off and turn on some worship music. It's okay to take a break from Netflix. Listen, the shows will be there. They'll always let out something new, and to crack open your Bible. It's okay to call someone on the phone and not complain, not tell them what's wrong with the world, to say, can you pray for me? Can you encourage me? Can you speak life, not death into me? Can I hear something from God? Can you hear from God and pray over me? It's okay, because we need some faith to continue our journey. I want to end with something from my friend Michael Kavanaugh shared. And as the band comes back up, I just want to share these thoughts that Pastor Michael Kavanaugh had. It was amazing. He said this: remember the Roman roads. Rome thought it was about world conquest, about control. But what they meant for evil, God turned for good. And those same roads that enabled the gospel to be preached to the whole known world at the time. The builders of the Erie Canal, they thought it would be used for commerce, trade, and money. But what they meant for greed, God turned for good. God used it so revival could spread throughout New York State. In fact, the areas along the Erie Canal became known as the burned out region because the fires of revival were so intense. There's another person, this guy named Chairman Mao. He's the founding father of the People's Republic of China. And Mao declared one China and one language, and many people suffered. There was a cultural revolution. But the gospel had faced tremendous resistance in China, mainly because there were so many different languages. But because of Mao, he forced the nation to speak one language. He thought it was about uniting China, but he really paved the way for the greatest revival that China has ever seen. The Romans thought it was about conquest. The builders of the Erie Canal thought it was about commerce. Chairman Mao thought it was about unifying China. And we think it's about stopping a pandemic. But it's never been about those things. It's always been about one thing: spreading the gospel of Jesus. Go into all the world and share the good news with everyone. You know what I love about that statement from Jesus? Is once I go, guess what? I'm on my way. And when I'm on my way, that's when I encounter God. Today, the pandemic has forced us down another road, down another way. But guess what? It's not about stopping a pandemic. It's always been and has always will be been about spreading the gospel. I'm on my way. It may not look like what I wanted it to. It may not be the way I wanted, but I'm on my way. I'm not giving up. And when I'm on my way, that's when I will run into God. As we get ready to sing my favorite song, I love the song, Do It Again. I want to remind you, don't give up. When life gets hard, when you make a mistake, when you aren't where you want to be, just remind yourself, I might not have arrived, but guess what? I'm on my way. And God did it with the Roman roads. God did it with the Erie Canal. God did it with Chairman Mao. And let me tell you something, God's going to do it with this pandemic. He's going to do it again with you. He's going to do it again with your family. He's going to do it again because he can move mountains. He could make a way where there is no way. God's going to do it again.